Okay, so we're in the middle of this sugya here. And last week we talked about a mahalach, a certain approach that Rashi might be taking here. The conundrum is, the problem is that the Mishnah before our Mishnah, the context before, is a discussion on various levels of privacy. And depending on what kind of property you have, there's different levels of privacy. If it's a chutzner, it's a higher degree of privacy. And therefore that's definitely a chiyuv to build a wall. If it's a gina, it's a garden, the privacy is a little bit less important than a chutzner. And then you follow minhag, and if there's no minhag, you treat it as if there was a minhag to build a wall. And the lowest of these categories is the bika, is the open field, in which there's barely any hazek re'iyah. And therefore, even if there's a minhag to build, there's a minhag to build. But if there's no minhag to build a wall, you treat it as if there's no minhag. There's no reason to cause anybody else to build. And this becomes problematic when we enter into this Mishnah, which tells us that when a fourth wall is built around the person in the middle, and the guy in the middle has to share the cost. However you slice it, whether the various different ways of understanding the Mishnah in the Gemara, whether it's the guy in the middle building the fourth wall and therefore he's demonstrating his willingness and his happiness with the first three walls, or whether it's the guy on the outside, either way, we are compelled to deal with this issue that at the end, the Gemara is obligating the middle guy to split the cost of a wall that seems to separate between him and the guys and the guy who surrounds him, which seems to be in contrast with the takana mentioned earlier, that that a bika, a field, does not have minhag and you're not required to build a wall. So why all of a sudden now there's a wall? Like the Lechem Mishnah wrote, he said, so maha'ilu chacham b'takanasa. What did the chachamim gain by making a takana that a bika has no minhag? Any guy who wants will box his neighbor in, and I compel him to pay for half the wall against his will. Because I boxed him in, I make a wall around his field, and he has to now all of a sudden pay. So what do the chachamim gain by this? So the simple way to avoid this problem, and this is the Lechem Mishnah's approach, and the Rashbam's approach we saw last week, is to say that, look, we're dealing with a new concern here. The concern here is not a question of whether the person on the inside sees the people in the field on the outside. So it's not a question of hezek re'iyah. It's not a question of people seeing me. It's not a question of privacy. It's a question of protecting my field against intruders, intruding animals, or even people. Let's just say animals, intruding animals, destroying my crop. And when somebody else, by building a wall around his field, causes me to have the benefit of my field being protected from intruding animals, I have to pay because I have that benefit. It's not a question of hezek re'iyah. It's not a question of protecting of privacy. It's a question of protecting against intruders, animals. In which case that means we're not talking about a wall 4 amas high. We're talking about a fence, simple fence. However, and this is what we started talking about last week, and this is what we're pointing out from Rashi, that Rashi seems to be connecting this Mishnah to the previous Mishnahs. He says clearly, that when the Tanna Kama says in the Mishnah, Ein mechav noisai, you don't oblige the guy in the middle to pay anything when there's only 3 walls. He explains why. Because Stam Bika is Makam Shalagu Shalal Ligdaru. And at no point does Rashi introduce the idea of protecting against intruders. Nowhere. And if Rashi is giving the Pashtup shot, and he's not expecting you to know any background, just expecting you to read the Gemara along, how are you supposed to know when you start from the beginning of the Masechta until you get here and all you read is Rashi? How are you supposed to know that all of a sudden we're dealing with intruders? Rashi never told us at one point, now we're dealing with intruders, which would leave the reader to assume we're still talking about the same issue of privacy. Yeah. And I'll push it even further. And this is a diuk. When I was reviewing the Gemara last week, this came to me, and I got more and more convinced that this is the correct way of understanding Rashi. So look in the case of Runya, right? At the top of Hey Amud Aleph, Runya and Ravina. So remember we pointed out that when Rashi describes the 3 fields surrounding the one field in the Mishnah, Rashi says, Shekana, that the guy on the outside bought one field, he bought another field, he bought it. As if to say, we were medayik, as if to say there's a new relationship being forged now. And one cannot claim chazaka that we've been living here for all this time without privacy. It's a new neighbor. Kana, he bought fields. Now, when it comes to the case of Runya, what does Rashi say? Dalot Sadois Hayu Ravina, Sadav Arba Mitzara Shal Runya, the Gidron. Ravina had, not Kana, he had 4 fields. Because in the case of Ravina and Runya, it's clearly talking about an issue of intrusion, not privacy. As Rashi says later, the Rashi Maskal Amar Le. So Ravina, right? Runya starts collecting dates from the tree, and Ravina sends his artist, his caretaker, to go take it away from him. So Runya starts screaming, and Ravina says, by you collecting your fruit, or by you screaming, either way, you demonstrate that you're happy with the protection of the fruit. You're happy with the fact that I built this wall. So how does Rashi explain Runya's happiness with the wall going up? Says Rashi, Omar Le. Or how does Rashi explain Ravina claiming to Runya that you are enjoying my protection? Says, or the wall. Says Rashi, Omar Le Ravina. Ravina says, you expressed your view that you are pleased, that are happy with the presence of these palm trees. Allah to you. Then and you are happy with their protection. This is the first time Rashi introduces the idea of Shemitah, protection. Nowhere before does Rashi mention protection. If you go back to the Rashi on Dal of the base, the Rashi where this is where Rashi explains what Hana happens when the 4th wall goes up. Says Rashi, because until the 4th wall goes up, he has no benefit. Because it's exposed. Doesn't say because it's not protected. It says Golohu, it's exposed. And like Adam pointed out last week, Golohu, the expression revealed, as if to say there's a problem of privacy. But if he build another wall, a Seravius, the 4th wall, he's happy because he's happy now. Happy with what?
Which
happy
Rashi is this?
Rashi on Daldam Beis. So when Rashi describes Runya's happiness with the wall that Ravina built, Rashi says, you're happy with the protection that my walls are providing. When Rashi describes the Hana of the guy in our Mishnah who finally gets the 4th wall put up, Rashi says, Shagolui, that the Hana he was lacking was Shadei Golui, and now that it's up, now it's no longer Golui. Doesn't say anywhere that he's gaining Shemitah. So this further pushes me to think that Rashi in the Mishnah is talking about an issue of privacy. And when it comes to the story of Ravina and Runya, then he pivots. Now he introduces this idea of Shemitah. And he changes the scenario. Whereas in the Mishnah, it's Kana. In Ravina and Runya, it's higher. He had fields around him, as opposed to he bought fields now around him. So, in other words, my claim that Rashi should tell us that the Gemara is pivoting from an issue of privacy, an issue of Hezekriya, to an issue of Shemitah, actually happens. But not in our Mishnah. It happens later in the story of Runya and Ravina, which further indicates to me that until that point when Rashi pivots from Hezekriya to Shemitah, Rashi is still talking about Hezekriya. And then the big shaila we have to contend with is, didn't we establish in the first Mishnah that there's no such thing as Hezekriya and Abika? There's no such thing as Hezekriya and Abika. So, and the other question is, the Gemara says that at one point, at least according to one view, the middle guy only pays for the cost of a guardman. And a guardman seems to defend against intruders, to pay for a watchman, to pay for a human scarecrow. So we suggested maybe it's a reference to protecting from Ayin Hara. Like Rashi points out that the Shemitah is there, dafke, when the stalks are up. And also I want to point to you to Rashi and Daf Dal Amud Aleph. Rashi Daf Dal Amud Aleph. Rashi says, Hash Stam Gina Amris Loi. This is when the Gemara is comparing a Gina to a Bika. And the Gemara raises a seeming contradiction in the Mishnah, an inherent paradox in the Mishnah between Gina and Bika. And there the Gemara says at one point, if a Gina doesn't need a wall, certainly a Bika doesn't need a wall. Why certainly, says Rashi? Even though the Hezekriya of a Gina is worse. meaning to say there is hezek riyah in a bika. It's just not as bad as gina. It doesn't say afapi she, even though there is hezek riyah in gina, whereas bika there isn't at all. Afapi she hezek riyah shekasha, as if to say there is such a thing as hezek riyah. And in fact, we had that in the Gemara before with the issue of ayin hara as a form of hezek riyah. So maybe. So we're still left with, it's still tight. It's not a clean, squeaky clean way of learning Rashi. You still have this issue of trying to understand what exactly is, why it changes with the fourth, if seemingly a bika is not. And we must therefore say that if I provide not just privacy between me and you, but total privacy to you, then you already have the hana. Because you have total privacy. It's not perfect. And there's a bunch of other things that I'm not, just to put it out there to tell you it's not so clean in my mind. There's other things other questions I have with Rashi that I'd like to see answered. L'mashal. Look at Rashi, Ema Sefer Rabbi Yossi, Omer. What does Rashi go on to explain? This is in the Gemara's question, right? There's Rav Huna and Rav Chia, right?
Now it's on Daf base, on base?
Daf Dal on base, yeah. We have Rav Huna and Chia Barav. Rav Huna said that when you split the cost of what the guy spent. And Rav Chia says you split the cost of the cheapest type of wall. And the Gemara again gets into, according to Rav Chia, where Rabbi Yossi says you're splitting the cheapest kind of wall, what's the machlokes between Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi, right? So Ema Sefer Rabbi Yossi Omer. Says Rashi, Bishtem Rav Huna, and so on. So Rashi goes on to explain Bishtem Rav Huna. So why is it the Bar Masla Ema Sefer Rabbi Yossi Omer? Why isn't it the Bar Masla Bishtem Rav Huna? Those words are from the Gemara also. Why isn't that the Bar Masla? Why is the Bar Masla Ema Sefer Rabbi Yossi Omer? These are just things that have come to me. I don't know. The last Rashi on the page, Vibois Eva Makif and Nikif. So this is the final answer. Where the Gemara says that when the Tanakama says that the middle guy has to pay for the fourth wall, that's if the guy in the middle built it, because he expressed his view that he wants it. Whereas Rabbi Yossi is adding that even if the guy on the outside built it. So look at the Rashi. It's very long-winded language. The Tanakama is Rabbi Yossi. The Tanakama agrees with Rabbi Yossi, which we haven't quoted yet. Hechadin Gadar Nikif, when the guy in the middle built the wall. Ava Rabbi Yossi less the Tanakama Gadar Makif. But Rabbi Yossi doesn't agree with the Tanakama when the guy on the outside built it. Such a strange way of saying. And then Rashi actually clarifies. Tanakama Savar Leishna Nikif Leishna Makif. Tanakama says it doesn't matter who built it. T Gadar Levi when he built the fourth wall. Okay, I misread. Sorry. Right. This was the final answer where Tanakama is more machmer. Tanakama says the guy in the middle always pays if there's a fourth wall, whereas Rabbi Yossi says only if the guy in the middle builds the fourth wall. Right? So Tanakama says relation on Nikif, relation on Makif. She got the Revius, Machayvanoisai. So my question to you is, why doesn't Rashi start off with those words? Tanakama Savar. The whole line before it, Tanakama is the Rabbi Yossi. Hechet the Gadra Nikif, Av Rabbi Yossi, less the Tanakama of Gadra Makif. That is redundant. It's an awkward language, which is then clarified in the next line. So why not go straight to the next line? And there's other such diukim in Rashi that I'm still not 100% clear on, but I think I'm in the right zone. I think I'm still correct to say that Rashi is still concerned with the issue of hezek riyah, even though, by the way, and now I want to go to the Rambam that I posted the other day. So the Rambam Hilchos Shcheinim, Perek Gimel, Halacha Gimel. So you have the WhatsApp there, you see the picture of the Rambam. So Rambam writes, Misha Haisala Chorva Ben Chorva's Chavere. One who had an abandoned, Chorva was an abandoned area, like a desolate, like a Chorva literally means like a destroyed structure, or a rubble, a ruin. An abandoned structure, abandoned something. Ben Chorva's Chavere. And he's surrounded by abandoned properties of another person. And the neighbors got up, the guy who has the three chorvos around. And he fenced in the first, second, and third side. Until he has his abandoned property, surrounded on three sides. He doesn't in the middle have to pay anything. Why? Because he has no gain from the three walls. His abandoned property is open on the four sides to the public. Now, therefore, if the guy on the outside built the fourth wall, and now his abandoned properties come fully encircled, you make him pay for the whole thing, for all four walls. You make him pay for half the cost of what that guy paid, like Rav Huna, all four walls up to 4 amas, because it's the issue of privacy. And this, by the way, the last line is something that Rambam adds. So long as the space of the wall belongs to both of them. That last line, before we get into the rest of the view, and this last line was not in Rashi, I haven't seen it in Tosafos, not in Tosafos either. Like, whose wall is it, B'chlal? Whose property is it? I'm paying for someone's wall on the other guy's property? So the Rambam writes this, and it's not quite clear exactly what his makar is, where his source is for this, because the Gemara doesn't mention anything like that. But be that as it may, the fact that the Rambam adds this detail that the wall is on both of their properties, and if it's on my property, I'm not responsible to pay for anything. If it's on your property, I'm not responsible to pay anything, even though I have the gain of privacy. Because it's not on my property, I don't got to pay for anything, which is an interesting diuk. But if you go back before, you'll see two specific points that the Rambam does here that change the whole scenario. The first thing is, he changes it from a bika to a churva. And like this, the Maggid Mishnah explains, he avoids our problem. Because the Gemara, the Mishnah said in the previous Mishnah, that a bika, when it comes to a field, there's no such thing as building a wall. And now all of a sudden, if you're encircled on four sides, you have to build a wall. Didn't we establish a bika doesn't need a wall? So therefore the Rambam says, like churva. So in the Rambam's opinion, there's 4 levels to the issue of privacy. There's a chotzer, in which certainly you must have privacy. Gina depends on minhag. If there's no minhag, we make as if there's a minhag. Bik, or the churva comes next, in which privacy only matters if you're completely encircled, not if you're separating between one neighbor and the other. And then you have bika, in which there's no such thing as privacy at all in a field. So the truth is, though, that the Mishnah itself doesn't use the word sada or bika. It says, "Hamkief is Chaveda mishalosh rechothiv." Guy surrounding his friend on 3 sides. What kind of property he has? Mishnah doesn't say anything. Rashi say we're talking about a bika. Rashbam said we're talking about a bika. Tosafos said we're talking about a bika. But Rambam says, Mechatesa, who said you're talking about a bika? Bika we already established in the previous Mishnah what the halach is. So it's a new case. And the new case is churva. The Lechem Mishnah asks the obvious question, which is, why would an abandoned property need privacy even more than a bika, than a field? It's an abandoned property. Why do you need privacy at all? And he writes here, he asks a whole bunch of questions on the idea that our Mishnah is talking about privacy, including the question that we asked last week, which is, why does the Gemara entertain the idea that maybe you should pay for a guard? What does a guard help for privacy? The issue is privacy. And therefore he says, conclude by saying, Vimkein, hasugya dechuka liashra sham mitam hezekriya. It is very difficult to explain this Gemara in the context of hezekriya. Ella, rather, the entire sugya is mitam shmira, because of protection. Ukenida midivrei Rashi zal. And as it would seem from Rashi, so clearly he's learning in Rashi, not the way I suggested learning. He's learning in Rashi that Rashi is talking about guarding. My big question is, where did Rashi say it? Rashi never said we're talking about protecting anybody. Never mentioned anything. But be that as it may, as Lechem Mishnah says. So now we really have, at this point, we have 3 mahalchim. We have 3 ways of understanding this Gemara. One way to understand is, we're talking about hezekriya in a field. Another way to understand it is, Rambam, we're talking about hezekriya in a churva. And then a third way, that Rashbam is saying, we're talking, and Tosafos and others, as we'll see, and Lechem Mishnah, we're talking about shmira. It's talking about protecting from intrusion. Okay. Now let's see. I want to show you the Rashba. Only part of the Rashba and the Shidduch Betzes. The other part of it will maybe reserve for after we learn the Mukha Yosef. So it's one of the pictured texts there. Sent is the Rashba. The Rashba and the Shidduch Betzes. So here you're going to see that he learns in Rashi. I don't want to know if it's exactly the way I'm learning, but it's definitely similar. It's certainly not like the Melech Mishnah, who says that Rashi is talking about Shmira from intrusion. And it could be, by the way, the Lechem Mishnah is talking about the Haggah, like the Rashbam. But he says, Rashi. But anyway, so let's see the Rashba. You have it? Okay. He quotes the Mishnah, Yesh Mefarshim, there are those that understand that Makif is Chaverim Mishal Shechaisav, the person who's surrounding his friend from three sides is Besadis, is fields. Unlike Rambam, which says it's Chorva. Now, the Gadol is Harishayna is a Shniya Vashlishis. And now he fenced off the first, second, and third field. Where did he put the fence? Between his field and the guy in the middle. And this is in line with what was learned before in the previous Mishnah. We're talking about places where some places there's a custom to build and some places there's a custom not to build. And what's the question of what kind of wall you're putting up? Between him and his friend. Now, he's talking about between him and his friend because, as we're going to see, there are those that say that the wall talking about here is not the wall that the guy on the outside builds, is not between him and the guy in the middle, but between him and the outside. So he's saying that just like before in the previous Mishnah, when you're talking about a chutzner or a gina, it's between you and your neighbor. So likewise here, it's talking about between you and the neighbor. V'chein Pirush Rashi. This is how Rashi learns. The Bava Kama. Here in our Rashi, it's not exactly clear because Rashi over here says that he bought 3 fields and the Gadol Shloshtan, and he encircled 3 of them. Not saying specifically where he put the fence, but presumably he put the fence around the whole thing, leaving the inside fence then also. But Rashi and Bava Kama is clear. We saw that last week also. Rashi and Bava Kama is clear. That it's talking about the fence between him and the guy in the middle. And the same thing is true of what my teacher taught here. And my teacher, I believe, the teacher at Rashba, if I'm not mistaken, is the Ramban, who's going to be quoted in the Mukha Yosef. Where is it? Yeah. The Ramban over here. As we're going to see when we learn the Mukha Yosef. So continues the Rashba. Now, and because the Mishnah says that when there's 3 walls go up, you don't make the guy in the middle pay. So you must conclude the bika stam kamaidi, that we're talking about a stam bika where there's no minug, because the ibn makam shinagu, because if the local custom is to build a wall, then afilu rashonis b'chayv v'noisai, then even the first 3 walls we make him build. Afilu lechatchila, even to begin with. Not min kayf v'noisai ligder. We would compel them to split the cost of the wall because it's a local custom to do so. So we wouldn't need to wait to the 4th wall. Now, by the way, this alone from the Rashba undermines a little bit what I was saying, because it could be that's what Rashi's telling us. Lav dafka is Rashi telling us by saying that the reason why it's not mechuyev is because it's stam bika. He's not telling us because the same issue is here because of Hezekriya, but because that's why it's not mechuyev. Because if it was a bika, where if there was a minig, it would be mechuyev even by the first 3. But I'm still sticking to mine, even though you can learn otherwise. El al karchach. Rather, please interrupt me if anything's not clear. El al karchach, rather, we must say. This Mishnah is talking about a bika where there's no minuk. We're not obligated to build anything. Now, as to the fact, here's where it gets interesting. And as to the fact that at the end of the day, the guy in the middle is enjoying of the fact that there are 3 fences around his field. We don't obligate him yet. Because he doesn't have the enjoyment. It's already open, because it's still open on the 4th side. For those walking by. Now, if you're going to say, well, okay, he has the enjoyment because 3 sides are closed, that he doesn't have because the 4 sides still open. Open to who? To people in the street. Now, as for the fact that maybe he has the hana of prevented hezek from the guy on the outside, he's at least not seeing his neighbor. Even if people from the street can see him, at least he still has the enjoyment of privacy from his neighbor. That is not enough to make him obliged. The hezek bebika, because hezek and bika hezek is not considered a hezek because the local custom is not to build. So if I were to stop you at this point, like all of this so far would work perfect with the way we're learning Rashi. I'm not obliged to pay for the hezekriya between me and you because there is no hezekriya in a bikah. I don't have any hana from the 3 sides because the 4th wall is still open, but open to who? To passerbys. So if you're claiming that you've given me total privacy, no, you haven't. As for the privacy between me and you, it's a bikah, and that doesn't count. So if you were to stop over here, I would say it's perfectly in line with Rashi the way we learned. But then he throws a wrench at me. Aval bat, not as if he had me in mind when he wrote this, but aval bat, if you close off the 4 sides, now he is giving him hana. But what kind of hana is he giving him? He's removing it from the intrusion of other animals. Why do you have to say that? But this is what he says. So, till now he says, see, before he said, why don't I have, when he described my lack of hana while it's still open, what did he say? He said, Adayin paratzu beruach revis la'ovrei derech. Who's ovrei derech? Animals? It's human passerbys who still see me. So he acknowledged that I'm not paying for the wall because I don't have proper hezek re'iyah, because I don't have proper privacy. But then when he says that I do pay, why do I pay? Not because now I'm protected against ovrei derech, but because you stopped the animals from waltzing in. Why couldn't you just say, like you said before, that now I have protection from ovrei derech? And then he would have, completely validated the way I think Rashi is learning. Because Rashi never mentions the word of regel v'shein. Rashi never mentions the word protection until, like you saw in the case of Runya. Beforehand, no mention. The only mention he mentioned, like you said last week, Adam, Sharei Goloi. It's open. It's exposed. But what I do gain from this is this language of oivlei derech. There's 2 elements to hezek re'iyah. There's hezek re'iyah between me and my neighbor. It's one type of hezek re'iyah. And that taka doesn't exist in a bikah.
That's seemingly the real hezekriya that we're talking about between neighbors.
Oh, you're talking about, sorry, why? Why?
Meaning that somebody who's always there, whereas like the ovrei derech is more,
right.
What Rashi says being about what Adam said about being revealed, that it's gully, it's open.
Right. So maybe that's a good point. Yeah, what were we saying?
Couldn't you say that the regel shein and behemoth is from the ovrei derech, and you can reconcile at least internally
within him
this? Yeah.
Yes.
Like people go by, it's an open road, people pass by with their animals, and their animals are going to graze and stamp on your field on the way.
Yeah, if we're looking to explain the Rashba as it's quoted here, then yes, you can say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, that doesn't not jive with Rashi. If the fact that it's galui is when he said use that lashon, maybe just means that it's open. And what's a problem with it when it's open? When someone walks by, their animals are going to stomp on it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that would work to explain this, but doesn't really help us in Rashi though. Yeah. So what? But Moshe, you said something before. You said what? You said something before, Moshe.
The Hezek Re'iyah is about a neighbor, not about the Oved Derech.
Right. So maybe Taka then this, and that's what I'm saying. That maybe this is what helped me here. And we're trying to figure out what changed between the previous Mishnah and this Mishnah, and why in this Mishnah all of a sudden Mechayv and Oisai when the Ruach goes up, whereas the previous Mishnah not. And the answer would be exactly that. In the previous Mishnah, we're talking about between neighbors, and in a bika between neighbors, there's no Hezek Re'iyah. But then when all of a sudden, when I help you save another type of Hezek Re'iyah, which is Hezek Re'iyah of Oved Derech, now we're going to make you pay. It's a different kind of Hezek Re'iyah. So maybe this is Taka the new Shlav. Even though you're arguing that Oved Derech is not as bad as a neighbor, because the neighbor is there continuously. But I can counter argue and say that that's true if you're talking about a chotzer, where my neighbors attack outside all the time. But a bika, where my neighbor is barely there, the only people I'm concerned about is Oved Derech.
Well, there's no Hezek Re'iyah in a bika.
But maybe from Oved Derech there are. Right? So in other words, there's another level here. Neighbors in bika takano Hezek Re'iyah. But the Oved Derech, which is not as bad as the Hezek Re'iyah of a neighbor in a chotzer, let's say, or not even as bad as the Hezek Re'iyah in a gina, but it's still some kind of Hezek Re'iyah. Especially if you want to throw in the idea of Ein Hara.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they're saying that's why you make him pay once he's totally enclosed.
Yeah, exactly. So it at least helps us give language, this idea of a new geder, a new category in Hezek Re'iyah and Bika, that it exists somewhat, but we still maintain the previous Mishnah where Stam Bika, we don't, in Mechayv and Oisai.
I guess it could be here in a bika reverse, that you really have more Hezek Re'iyah from the passersby who are there more frequently than, per se, your neighbor.
That's what I'm arguing. That's exactly what I'm arguing.
Okay.
Okay, there's more of a pilpul in this inyan, and he introduces later. There's still two more paragraphs to this Rashi, which I didn't send you because I just wanted to point to that thing of Oved Derech, the difference between Oved Derech versus the neighbor and versus Regel V'Shem. I just wanted to make the point that there are three elements here. There's the neighbor's Hezek Re'iyah, which we discount based on the preceding Mishnah. There's this other issue of Oved Derech, and then there's another issue of Shem V'Regel Behemis, or Regel V'Shem Behemis. The Regel V'Shem Behemis Rashi does not talk about. The Oved Derech we could squeeze in Rashi, even though Rashi doesn't say it specifically. He just says Golui, because again, it's another thing which is bothering me. Rashi does not say who owns the fourth side. Is it a public space? Is it a private field? Who owns it? That's another thing that's a little bit bothering me. But I think it's more easy to squeeze in the idea of Oved Derech into Rashi than it is to say Shein Behemis, Regel Shein Behemis in Rashi. That's how I see it. Right. Anyway, okay. Now let's look at the Rabbeinu Yonasan, and then we'll go to the Tosafos. No, then we'll go to the Rabbeinu. Then we'll go to Yosef. Okay, so Rabbeinu Yonasan is the other picture that we have in the WhatsApp chapter. Rabbeinu Yonasan and Shittim Mikabetzes. So this is like all of these things. How just to put it out there, in my mind, I'm learning Gemara Rashi, right? And I'm trying to be medayik as much as I can in Rashi. All the other things I'm not learning at the same kind of precision. Just kind of helping sharpen my tools as I'm looking at Rashi to see if I can compare and whatnot. Okay, so Avad Rabbi Yonasan Zal Pirush. The Mishnah say no. So all of the above, the Rashba, Rashi, and everything else we've been learning, is understanding the Mishnah that it's a makim shenagu shaloi ligder. And then we get stuck into this issue of why are you paying for the fourth wall if it's a makom shenagu shaloi ligder? And we have all kinds of explanations where it's a chorva, like Rambam, or you're protecting from shein v'regel, or protecting from every derech, which is a new kind of hezekriya. But the Rebbe goes in a different direction. It says Pirish, the Mishnah saying, makom shenagu ligder b'bikrahi. It's talking about a place where there is a minhag. Gazelle shayna makom chavere chulu. Kalaim, I mean to say. Shekona Reuven Arbesades. Reuven bought 4 fields. He's very straight about who owns the 4th side. Saviv Sada Shimon, around Shimon. The God of Reuven Geder ben Shimon, ben Ashalish Ruchis. And now he built a wall between him and Shimon on 3 sides. The Niach Ruach Achat Perutza, but left one side open. Benoy ben Shimon, between him and Shimon. And again, the local minhag is that you have to build a wall. Because Makam Shanago lived there. B'chol Sadeisa Shal Reuven, Perutza Serushas Rabin. Now Reuven's fields, his 4 fields, are open to the public. Now, and we're talking about a place where it's a minhag to build between fields in a bika, because if it was a place that we don't build, even if you put it on all 4 sides, you wouldn't pay anything. Like the question of Lecha Mishnah, the question we're contending with here. But because it's a place where where there is a minhag to build a wall, had you built all 4 walls, then you would be obligated by law to pay for part of it, and to buy half the space. Rambam said that, remember? So long as it belongs to half the space. But since it's in Rabbeinu Yonasan, since it's makom shenagu ligder, and which means later on, and we have to make sure at the outset that the makom belongs to both of them. And therefore, we're going to compel the guy in the middle to first of all pay for the cost of half the wall, plus buy the space of half the wall. Right? Oh yeah, gather the fence. Because the guy on the outside built it on his whole side to begin with. And this, there would be no confusion, no issues. It's a minhag to build a wall between 2 sides, and therefore if I went ahead and built a wall completely between me and you have to pay for the other half and for the half the space. 3 sides, 4, whether I'm neighbors on you on 1 side, I'm neighbors on you on 2 sides, or on 4. If I built a wall that separates completely between my property and your property, you got to pay for half. And therefore, Bein Rabbi Yossi, Bein Tanakama, Moidu, they would agree, the Yoav Chelke, Mishalem. But, Aval Ki Pligi, where's the dispute between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Tanakama? Where Reuven only built on 3 sides. And now Reuven takes Shimon to court and says, give me half, because it's a makom shenagu ligder. And Shimon responds, says, thank you very much. I'm not paying you anything. You didn't prevent me from the hezekriya that you're obliged to. If you're claiming I have to pay for half of these because it's a hezekriya and it's a makom shenagu, you didn't build all 4. So Yosha Zakai, he leaves as he's the winner. Because he hasn't yet given him the full benefit of the minhag to have a private field. Because they still see each other from the 4th side. And the guy in the middle doesn't care to ever build it. And that's why they allowed Shimon to go scot-free. Shimon on the middle, the guy in the middle, on the inside. Now, Lachazman, later time, at some later point, Nimluch Reuven changed his mind. The God there below died to Shimon, and now he built the 4th wall without informing Shimon. And now he takes him back to court again and says, look, 5 years ago when I took you to court, you said that the reason why you're not paying is because I didn't fulfill my obligation completely. Now I did. So say, look, you've already won your case in the first 3. We can't go back and redo that. But the 4th one will make you pay half. But for the original 3, loy, you can't. Because I already protested it. It's already been clear, and I protested it at the outset, and you built it all on your side. We can't say that now a new din comes and we have to undo it. It's too late already. Sorry, skip line. We say that the din is established. But if the guy in the middle went out and built the fourth side, the girl died to the nichele, and now he's expressed clearly that he's happy with the first 3 walls that were built. Then we talk and make him pay for the other 3. You can't say the din is established because the defendant himself undid the law, undid the ruling that defended him. The ruling that defended him, which said, look, you're not getting hanas, you don't have to pay. He himself went and undid it by not building the wall. And therefore, Elahada din, we got to undo the din. Okay. It's a very geschmack way of learning. And I'm wondering why it's not more pashtas than Rashi. Like it seems like it's pretty good. And I mean, it's pretty good. It doesn't need my assurance, but the lashon in the Mishnah isn't good. That's the problem. Anyway, let's conclude and I'll show you what I mean. Rabbi Yossi is of the view when the guy in the middle got up and built the wall, and we make him pay for all the 3, can the same thing. Namiyim Amad Nak, the same thing. The guy on the outside. Even though he already left court exonerated without paying anything for the first 3 walls, nonetheless, even the because this is a local custom is to build a wall. In other words, the reason why you got away is because you didn't enjoy the benefits of the local minhag. But in other words, your whole defense is built on you're not enjoying the local minhag. But now you are enjoying the local minhag. So if you got to pay, because the local minhag still stands. In other words, it's the same thing that got you away free the first time that's now telling you you're obligated to pay now. And he says even further, had the Shimon not demanded of you to pay the first 3 walls, and he would have waited 5 years till he had enough money to pay for the 4th wall and then take you to court, he would have taken made you pay for all 4. Because given the makam shagol look there, Rabbi have it. And therefore it's appropriate to say to undo the din, because even the Tanakama would agree that had he waited till the end, after he built 4 walls, take him to Bezdin, Hitaka would have paid for all 4. I hope that's clear. I think it's very geschmack. In Pashtas Lashon Mishnah, it's not perfect. And the reason is, I think, for 2 things. First of all, the Mishnah doesn't mention anything about it. Yeah, what? Sorry, you want to say something?
The Tanakama would agree that if he would wait to take him to Basin,
so after the 4th wall, he would build it. He would pay for all 4.
After he builds the 4th wall, then he would take him to Basin.
Even if there's a 5 years gap between the first 3 and the 4th, which is clearly not like Rashi. It's not like Rashi B'chlal anyway. But Rashi here says, Yotzim Hem Zakah Bezdin, Shahayu Sham Yam Rabim. Meaning it seems like from Rashi that even the very fact that it's been a long time without that 4th wall, it's considered Zikr B'din. I don't have to actually go to Din. But the Ben Yonason seems to be saying you have to actually go to Din to get that Zikri. And therefore, had you waited till after, you would have been charged.
And Rabbi Yonason, according to him, if I take him to Din the first time, I've kind of forfeit that money when I do build the 4th wall.
Exactly. I forfeited the money of the first 3 walls. I jumped the gun. It's kind of unfair, really. If the local minhag gets to build, it's not fair. Okay. Anyway, Rashi says clearly we're talking about a makam shanabu shalai leader, and I think another reason why just a simple reading of the Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Yonasan, because look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says hamakif is chaverim b'shalosh shechaysav the gadol sheshayna v'sashniya v'sashlishis. In Rabbi Yonasan's version, it should have said hamakif is chaverim me'arba rechaysav. The gadol is sheshayna v'sashniya v'sashlishis. Then in Mechayv and Oisai. But God of is Mechayv and Oisai. The Mishnah says he's only makif him on three sides, not he's makif him on a fourth. Right? So if you want to learn that later he bought another field, mele, right? Where did we saw it? We saw that somewhere. Where he bought another field. We saw that in Rashi and Bava Kama, where he bought a fourth field. But Rashi doesn't mention that here. And Rabbi Yonis doesn't mention that either, where he bought three fields, and then the second clause is where he bought a fourth field. But rather, he bought four fields around him, all at once. And if that's the case, the Mishnah should have said, but God there only Aleph Beis Gimel. Whereas the Mishnah says he only surrounds him on three sides. Right? And especially the way Rashi is saying it, that I was building a fence around my field. The Nimtza, and the result is the guy in the middle is surrounded. But I wasn't building it because of me and you. I was building it because I want to have my field fenced. Anyway, as you can see, there's a lot more to be said, but okay, let's go to the Mukha Yosef, and then Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Maybe we'll look at the Tosafos tomorrow.
And according to Rabbi Yosef, it's more machmir. What's that pirush?
Where Tanakam is more machmir, you mean?
Yeah.
How would Rabbi Yosef explain all these different versions in the Gemara?
No, just the shot at the end there where we were saying that Tanakam is more machmir.
In Rashi?
Yeah.
That Tanakam is saying that no matter who builds the fourth wall, you pay. Whereas Rabbi Yosef says only if the guy in the middle builds the wall, you pay. And that's their confusing Rashi there, the last two lines in the Rashi and Daf Dal on the days. Okay, let's start with the Mukha Yosef, and then we'll go back to Tosafos in the middle, or maybe we'll leave the Tosafos for next week. Okay, so it starts in Mas Nisan. I'm sorry, for tomorrow, not next week. Hamakav Chaver Mishal Shechosav Chulu. Pirosh Mishi Yesh Galad Sode Sovev Sode Chavere. So he's already in line with the Ben Yonason here, at least in this event, in this regard, that he owns all four fields surrounding the guy in the middle. The God of Ben Anikif, and he built a wall between him and the guy in the middle. I said Shayna the first field, but afterwards Ashniya the second field, and as well as the third field. Then we don't oblige the guy in the middle to pay for those walls. Because now he's deviating from the Ben Yonason, because we're talking about a place where it's a stam bika where there's no minhag, and therefore shu makem shenagu shelo ligder, and therefore there's a minhag not to build, and therefore because to begin with they can't compel each other to split the cost of a wall because it's a minhag. There's no minhag here. Gamata. Even now, when the guy on the outside decides to build a wall, he's not obligated to pay anything. The lake of Emar, because you can't say that the guy in the middle is enjoying anything of it. Why? Because it's still open to the fourth side. This seems to be like the Rashba we saw. That seems like the Rashba we saw. Because the fourth wall is still open, and therefore there's no hana that the guy in the middle gets. But if he builds the fourth wall, then we do obligate him. Why? Because now he gives mana, because he prevents regel harabim. This is a new geder. It's not oivre dachim. It's not shein v'regel, but it's a regel harabim. It's people, human intruders. Okay, like who's the regel harabim here? Because there's a field between him and the Rosh Hashanah, right? Because he started off by saying that the scenario is the guy on the outside owns 4 fields. So whatever regular Arabim is getting to the inside is getting to the outside guy first. No? Who else is the regular Arabim here? Unless he means Arabim as in like the animals. I don't know. Anyway, in Taimar, I'm just pointing these things out. Not that I have any perfect understanding of all of it. In Taimar, if you're going to ask, even the Malkim asking on, if we're talking about a case where there's no minute to build, this is the question we've been all dealing with. Is when he goes on, allowing them builds the 4th wall. Why are we obligated to pay? Because one guy goes ahead, this guy goes ahead, continue on top of the next page, and decides to build a wall. This guy loses out. I mean, it's a makam shlogish leligder. So you go ahead and build. Now I have to pay. So Tiras and Ramban the Ramban answers. Einochanam, taka right. The lachatchila ein l'chayven oisei. That right from the start, you're right. We don't make him pay. V'chein likewise, Nami as well. Im omad mikif, if the guy in the middle got up, umicha boy, and protested b'shar shahaya goyder at the time when he was making the fence, v'omer loy, and he tells him shalo yigder al manas lishtalim memenu. Don't build this on condition expecting me to pay later. I'm standing now and protesting. Let's say he brings witnesses also and says, I'm not paying for this wall. You're doing it, it's on you. You attack to be potter. But so long as the guy in the middle didn't protest, so long as he doesn't say, go ahead and build this, but don't do it on my dime, chayev, he's obligated. Why is he obligated? This follows the halacha of if someone enters somebody else's field without permission, and he went and planted a vineyard, and it's the kind of field that's supposed to be vineyard, so I could do a favor. And the owner of the field, you didn't protest my actions. Right? So I went to the field, you saw me go down there, and I'm doing all this work, and now the field's doing well. So what do we do now? You didn't protest. So says the halacha, this is the Gemara in Bava that I sent you yet last week. Sheshamin loy, the yodeh ala yona. This is the Gemara in Bava Kuf Aleph Amad Aleph, which essentially is this din, Rav and Shmuel discussing. This is something that Tosafos brings up as well. Tosafos brings up this Gemara, and when we look at it, we're going to compare the way Ramban quotes this Gemara, the way Tosafos quotes this Gemara. It's a bit different. And where is that actually? So it's like this. What does it mean? His hand is on the lower side. So we make a calculation, and his hand is on the lower side, right? His hand is on the upper hand. He has the upper hand. So it means like this. How much did I spend? I have to get back the money I invested in making your field better because I increased the value of your field. So like this. We're here at Yodel Tachtoina. Maybe this is. Anyway, it's like the thing is like this. Why does it say Yodel Yoyena? The version of the Gemara we have is Yodel Tachtana.
The Balasada, the one who did the planting.
The other guy. The other guy's Yodel Yoyena. Basically, it's like this. The lashon here in the Mishnah is the lashon of the Gemara in Bava Metzia is Yodel Tachtana. Unless there's a later case with Yodel Yoyena. I don't see that. Anyway, so it's like this. What you do is you evaluate the expense against the gain. If the expense is worth more than the gain, then all I get is the gain in the field. So if I spent $1,000 planting those crops and it only yields $500, all I get is $500. I lost $500. But if I spent sorry, that's right. So I only get that. But if I spent 1,000 and the result is 1,500, I only get back 1,000. So I get the less of the two, whichever one's less, either the expense or the gain. That's Yod Al Tachtoina, which is the lashon here in the Mishnah, which is the lashon here in the Gemara.
Yeah, so here in
Yod Al
Mukhi,
Yoina.
yeah, because Balasada Yad Al Yoina. That's what it's saying in Mukhi Yosef.
Oh, yeah, I guess the Balasada is Yad Al Yoina, yeah. Whereas over here talking about the other guy. Yeah. So if that's the case, the same thing over here, where I go into your field and I protect it on 4 sides. So even though you're not mechuyev midin privacy, because there is no issue of privacy in Bika, but Lapoyal, I gave you a value to your field, and therefore weigh the value I've given you against the cost of what I spent for you, and then give me the lesser of the two. Now it seems like this parenthesis is a different version, but because it goes back. Because so long as he hasn't got the hana when it's still open, because it's a shorter version of the previous thing. Okay, even though, and this is an interesting thing, even though we're in a place where the minig is not to make a geder, and therefore you can't be machayev me, it's still a good thing to have. And it's like it's something the field needs, even though it's not the kind of thing that I can oblige my neighbor to split the cost of. But still, it's a normal thing that a field needs a fence, and therefore you can compare it to a field that's standing there waiting to have a vineyard planted in it. Even though even though he already went to court and did not have to pay for the first 3, we don't say that he lost out on the first ones. So long as the 4th one is up, and he got the full hana, and he not just the full hana of he got like the guy increased the value of my field by making it fully fenced in. The guy will make him pay for the whole thing. It says by saying that he did one and then another, we're saying as like how much the more so. That even though he did one at a time, and each time he did it, he got away without paying. Still, when he builds the 4th, he has to pay. Instead of the Mishnah just saying he got up and got them and shlushed them, and he closed off all 3 of them. Okay, so you have here the same mahalach as the Rashba, a bit of a different language, because he says here regel harabim, whatever that means, and we have another reason why you're mechuyev to pay. Why are you mechuyev to pay when you're mahana some guy, even if you're protecting him from shame v'regel, even if that's the issue, then why am all of a sudden do I have to pay? I never asked the guy to build that wall. Why am I all of a sudden paying? So explains in the Mukhi Yosef from the Ramban, and it's based on the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which says that if I go into a field and I increase the value of somebody else's field, then I get to have some sort of compensate, and the owner of the field didn't stop me, didn't protest, then some sort of compensation comes to me, and that I get back either the expenditure or the increase in value that I've added to the field, whichever one is less. And if the same thing with this guy, I increase the value of your field by putting these 4 walls, even though you never asked, you still got to pay for it. So we have something. Again, I don't think you can learn this in Rashi, because Rashi doesn't mention anything like this. Anyway, Mitzvah Shem next week, tomorrow, we're going to look at the Tosafos, and then we'll go back to the second part of the Mukhi Yosef, which is kind of compared to Tosafos. And I think we're going to stop the sugya here, and we'll go on to the sugya of Runya and Ravina. And maybe we'll spend 1 or 2 shiurim on that. Okay, any comments or questions? No? Okay, I'm good.